Hi, it's Jeremy Langner, and I will be reviewing the book Breathing Space, A Spiritual Journey in the South Bronx by Heidi Neumark, 2003 Beacon Press. So Heidi Neumark is an ELCA pastor of born to German immigrants, but finds herself called to this Puerto Rican congregation in the South Bronx, a congregation that during her time in ministry there expands to include a wider diversity of people, people of African American descent, all sorts of other people that are moving into the area. And of course, this setting, the South Bronx, is a setting where there's a lot of poverty. The community is definitely changing over her 20 years there, but lots of drugs, lots of crime, really difficult living situations, and so that's the setting of the book. So Heidi uses this metaphor of breathing space as a central metaphor for the book, longing for physical breathing space in a neighborhood where the pollution, the air pollution, is so terrible, and also indoor air quality for many people is really bad, with rodents and just terrible upkeep of buildings and things like that. All sorts of cases of asthma, but also longing for spiritual breathing space and silence, when there are gunshots or sirens in the night, and just what can seem like a very chaotic neighborhood many times. So she develops the memoir using the timeline of this construction project at Transfiguration called Space for Grace, which is a community resources facility. But of course, it's not just a construction project. As the physical building is transformed, so is the community transformed. So is the congregation transformed, and so she transformed. She ties in all sorts of biblical narratives um, into the story to kind of frame it, as a lens for the stories that she tells. So, for example, she starts off talking about her morning sickness as a pregnant mother and presiding over communion, with his morning sickness, having to run to the bathroom, interrupting the presiding, but yet how the community comes around her in that and embraces her womanhood and celebrates it, instead of seeing that as a deficiency in ministry, seeing that as something to be celebrated. So that's really incredible. Throughout the book, there's all sorts of heartbreaking stories, but there's also stories of hope, and stories how not only Heidi is ministering to the community, but the community is taking care of her. One of the first stories she tells is the story of a woman who is in the streets cleaning the blood off of her murdered son off the pavement, and how Heidi feels it's her job as a pastor to get out and stop traffic in the streets while this mother can do this. So that's kind of stories that fill the book, really heartbreaking stories, but there's also stories of finding humanity in this really often inhuman place. So for me, it was a real exposure to the realities of urban life, especially in areas that are really poverty-stricken. It was a heavy book emotionally for me. It's just kind of story after story. But it was also a book of hope, and for me, really witnessing to the powerful presence of Christ in this community. And Heidi's really good at not presenting herself as a someone who comes in with all the answers, but rather someone with lots of vulnerabilities and doubts and mistakes, and yet celebrating all the little victories, and things that go right in the places where Christ shows up in the midst of all of this. So at the end of the day, I think that it's a must-read for anyone considering urban ministry, core ministry, but also for folks in more affluent settings. This is important. It's important to recognize that the church's witness in places like the South Bronx, and we can't be divorced from that. We can't be insulated from that, because Christ's presence is real there. So ultimately, I recommend the book. I think it was a really good read, something I'll be reflecting on for a long time to come. Thanks a lot.